electricity supply is going to become increasingly more dynamic, and it's one of the things that the people who have solar panels and batteries can shift their energy use or export when we're at peak at the peak time when the export price is higher. And similarly, electric cars are now potentially being used as sources to be able to do the similar sort of thing, to discharge when the price is high and import at low prices. And I'm sure you're right that the overnight prices will go up as more people are doing more things overnight. And I guess that's about being agile and working with that. If there are things you can do at the price when the price is cheap, whenever that happens to be, and it will vary over time. And that's also for the larger energy users to do. They're already doing that. They're obviously scheduling things at cheaper times, and as those move around, they'll have to continue to vary those. I don't know if that's something that's particularly been modelled, because it's an unknown really in terms of where that's going, I think.
Thank you. And just to let everyone know, the audio is back on YouTube as well. So anyone listening on YouTube wouldn't have heard us say that it had gone off, but you're back. Next, I have got Councillor Wright, please.
Yeah, judging by what you said about the finances and that there are grants going to be needed to apply for and stakeholders going to need to be negotiated with, there's a reluctance for people to get out their cars and on their bikes and various other reasons. How achievable do you think the 2030 and 2045 targets actually are in reality?
Councillor Hadley.
Well, I suppose if you don't try, then you're not going to get there. There's something about setting a vision and aiming towards it. I think there are the 2030 targets about the public sector, and certainly in terms of the buildings, we have some control. But we know that, for example, our housing stock, there's an awful lot of retrofit needed for that, and a huge price tag for that, which we haven't got the means to pay for at the moment. So we are obviously talking to government about that, or trying to understand with the MCLG how we achieve that. I think it is about setting out a direction. If we want to get to net zero, this gives a route, a roadmap for us to enable us to get there. Yeah, we will do the best we can. I won't say definitely today that we will get there. What I will say is I'm giving it my best to try and make sure that we do.
And Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just cast my mind back to obviously when we've had the dashboard and we've taken the annual report as well, and we've spoken about 2030 as well as 2045, and just the recommendations that we made when we did the budget working group. And at the time, it didn't seem very exciting when presenting it to the ONS board, because a lot of it was all dependent on about getting to this point now with the local area energy plan. So I'm just wondering, in terms of what we were saying at that time about gap analysis on where, because of the actual funding we currently have, and in terms of what the money we're going to need to spend in order to achieve this, whether any of that work had been started to look at, I'll just find the exact wording we used, to include a gap analysis of the estimated total amount of spend required to reach net zero targets against the work already underway within departments to reach these targets. And then in terms of once this report, which has now come, and suggested to Cabinet, once Cabinet receive this report, that there's a look at including the full associated costs with reaching net zero by 2030 within the medium-term financial plan, which obviously is an absolutely terrifying thing to do in terms of if you'd actually realise that. But in terms of just showing us what is the scale of the challenge and what it actually means to try and meet that. Because I think we all agree it's a big challenge, but it also needs to be down there in hard figures, at least at sort of an estimate level.
Chair, so so there has been some work undertaken, and we've been working with for example, the housing team on what does it mean to get to EPCC, what does it mean to get to EPCB to be able to improve the thermal efficiency and the various renewable heating options for our housing stock, for our social housing stock that we operate. There's then another level of difficulty for privately rented houses and for owned houses across the area, we don't have the full answer yet. And I think partly that's because the team have been busy working on this to date. I forgot to mention that we've actually had a meeting last week with partners, Coastal Energy Partnership, which is a launch looking at how we can operate with the other organisations. So again, getting partners to share experience, to share knowledge and support each other to achieve that. And part of that is working with one of our local MPs, Tom Hayes, who has the brief for energy nationally. So in terms of the opportunities for attempting to get money in from government, if it exists, then hopefully he will know about it, and he's on board with trying to ensure that we are at least getting our applications in. So I'm travelling hopefully, and I think in terms of the request from the requirement from the ONS board previously, we will get to it. We're not quite there yet.
Thank you. I think we've given this a really good airing and had some good debate on this. I've got a couple of questions, but first of all, I just want to say I think this report has been really good. What Joe, you've done with City Science and creating this and creating something pretty easily digestible for people to get around and making it something which is clear to understand, I think is really important. I think we've managed to do that here. One of the key bits that I want to talk about, I think we've done the technical side quite a lot, and I've got a lot of other things I could go on all night about, but I won't, is the next steps from this point now. Obviously, this is going to be going to Cabinet, and the recommendation is for this to be adopted. And one of the key elements is going to be the engagement with the work groups which have been looked at, so the external stakeholders, for example, which is listed on one of the pages, which I can't quite find at the moment, if you bear with me. Page number 3 or 33 in our reports, where we've got the core project stakeholders, the wider project stakeholders, and the external stakeholders. A lot of this is going to be reliant on SSE, for example, Scottish and Southern Energy Networks, particularly for the downstream demand for things like the big EV chargers, for the things like the buses and the dust carts and all of that. So where are we at the moment with speaking to SSE about what their plans are and what they're going to be doing for this area? And then I'm going to make a recommendation in a minute, but I'll leave it just there for a second, if you can just answer that, please. Yes,
I mentioned that the Coastal Energy Partnership and SSE were there, and part of that discussion. And we've had several meetings with them, because one of the, and again I mentioned at the start how constrained our energy supply is. We're reliant on the Mannington supply point up at West Moors for the whole conurbation, and they are doing some current work on beefing up the supply. But they need information from us, because as the answer to Councillor Wright, we don't know exactly where our depot is going to be. We know we want to move it, but we don't know exactly where it's going to be yet. And until we know where it's going to be, they don't know where it needs to get hooked up to. So they need information from us. They need information of the bus company to be able to predict. And they're going through a process at the moment. And I've forgotten what the acronym is, but there is an acronym for a process where they're saying anything over 10 megawatts, we need to know about it. So they're asking us to help in identifying not just our needs, but the needs of partner organisations for bigger potential hookups, because they've got a plan 10, 15 years ahead. And they said, the lead time on getting a new transformer for a substation is several years. So they have to think long term and think ahead. And they're also working within the constraints of the energy regulator that tells them how much money they can spend. So there's a whole chain of requirements really to get from us saying, yeah, we do want more energy at this point, to them going, well, you can have it, but not for another 10 years. Thank you. My last question, the last question on this item, before I give a little recommendation that I want to give, is what can we do now as this Overview and Scrutiny Committee to help progress this, to add any more value that's needed? How can we as members get involved in making sure that we can achieve this plan? Thank you. Yes, so the action plan highlights 15 points, and one of those is around heat networks, for example. We have some work going on at the moment to try and identify a bit more detail that, and I keep saying but when do we actually get to create a heat network? Because that bit about reaching a point when people building new buildings know that there's something they can link into, and therefore that they should be considering as a heating source for their building. The hospitals are the university hospitals at both Bournemouth site and Poole site are very keen on the idea of geothermal to meet some of their heating needs, and being linked into a wider network. So we have the embryonic on that action. There's work going on now. So I suppose part of it will be picking off each of those 15 points and the action plan that we need to create, and then perhaps for this committee to consider that and to knock them around and quiz me on whether we're actually making progress on it.
Progress is what's important, right? So yeah, so breaking this down and finding little chunks of work where we can really get involved and start to make a difference. I think that's how we like to do a lot of our work on this committee. So the recommendation I want to make on this to Cabinet is, again, on the stakeholders page. Councillor Hadley, you've mentioned a few times tonight about community energy or community involvement. And there's a massive gap on the external stakeholders list that is here. We've got landowners and developers, industrial sector, public sector partners, transport sector, commercial, energy suppliers, department. Where's the link to the community in BCP? And I think that's really, really important that needs to be included somehow, whether that's through a community group, community representation on any working groups and panels, particularly looking at the areas where later in the plan it talks about the areas which suffer through much more fuel poverty as well, and making sure that the voices of residents and the communities are heard there. So I'd like to make a recommendation for the committee that we add as an external stakeholder our community to be represented on all of those panels, and I'll look for someone to second that. Councillor Doughton-Gibson, and can I just have any debate on that actually, first of all? No, can I have Councillor Hadley?
I just draw attention to Action 7, which is about encouraging community energy projects, and engaging with the community is one of the 15 key elements. But absolutely happy with your recommendation if that's how you want to make it.
I just want to see it on that front page, really, really high up in this. So yeah, I do note that it was elsewhere. I should have said that as well. So can we, I have a show of hands just to take that recommendation to Cabinet? And that looks unanimous to me. So all that's left to do on this item is thank you, Councillor Hadley, Neil, and Joe. Thanks very much for your time this evening. And yeah, hope to hear from you in the future as well on how this is going and what else you're doing with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Long.
Okay, so if we run straight on to item number 7, which is going to be the email and document storage retention, impact analysis on costs and environmental factors and recommendations, which is going to be presented to us by Councillor Hannah and Sarah. Sarah, yeah, hi. Hi, I'll just give you a moment to take your seats. Thank you. If we're all settled in, then Councillor Hannah, can I ask you to introduce this paper to us, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for the invitation to meet with you. Can I admit that before the invitation, the carbon emissions caused by digital storage was not high on my personal agenda, so I'm grateful to the committee for raising it. Officers have put together the report that you've received, which I think covers the issues, but they're also here ready to answer any questions you may have. Having reviewed the report further to its publication, I think it's worth clarifying that the options it sets out are not technically mutually exclusive options, which is why the recommendation invited you to consider both option A and option B. Option B, in fact, is something that is happening already and will continue, although possibly with a greater financial motive than environmental. There is no point in individual members of staff having licenses for more extensive use of Microsoft's products than they need, and moving staff to lower tier and thereby less expensive licenses makes sense and is being done. Just what difference this will make to the carbon footprint, I'm not sure. And in any case, the committee's focus was on the carbon emissions caused by storage rather than use of Microsoft 365. Option C, moving away from Microsoft 365, is a clear alternative to options A and B, though not recommended. It would involve significant upfront costs for infrastructure, training, and support. It would also reduce collaboration capabilities and introduce risks around disaster recovery and business continuity. Microsoft 365 offers integrated tools and built-in resilience that are difficult to replicate cost effectively. Again, the committee's interest is in emissions caused by data storage, and it is unclear whether moving to another system would change the carbon emissions involved in data storage, or whether any change would be a decrease or an increase at this time. Option A suggests reducing the time period for which data is stored from the current 5 years, and can happen alongside option B. I notice on rereading the report, however, that where it says that the previous 12 months BCP Council's overall emissions generated by its use of Microsoft 365 is 14.014 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, it does not separate that into emissions caused by use of the software from emissions caused by storage of data as such. It is difficult, therefore, to estimate the effect of reducing the time period of storage on that figure. Nor does the report suggest by how much the time period for storage might be reduced. It does indicate the risk that reducing it may limit the capacity of the Council to retrieve data, which needs to be balanced against the environmental impact of any reduction. That balance is something that the committee may wish to explore. If I may, I will leave it there and hand over to the committee for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for preparing this paper and bringing it to us. It was actually at the request of one of our previous members who asked for this, who's joined us today, Councillor Herrick. You wanted this put on our agenda. Do you want to, I'll invite you in to, go first.
So this was my parting gift to the committee. Or actually, one of my parting gifts to the committee. I think the other one is next. I think, and it came because because in my previous job, it got flagged that the amount of pictures that were being saved on signatures alone were generating a really significant impact on obviously the amount of data that we're retaining, and obviously the energy that kind of thing almost like uselessly because of the amount of emails that are now sent, and it's by definition a growing problem. So I think that's what I was particularly interested in. It's actually reassuring to see that it's not quite as bad as you might imagine, but I think in terms of embracing new ways of working as well, particularly with say Teams and things like that, where you don't have email signatures and it's a more live system, it'd be interesting to see whether some effort, because I think that's actually probably in terms of collaboration, probably easier from what I've been told, and a better direction of working for teams as well. So I suppose that's my point/question.
Councillor Anna, do you want to pull a question out of that?
I'm going to let the experts.
So I can probably take that. I'm Mark Biondick. I'm the head of IT infrastructure part of Sarah's management team. I'm responsible for the platform security, etc., around our IT systems. Yes, well summarised. Teams is absolutely, and Microsoft 365, especially in this day and age, is an infinitely better way to collaborate in a modern enterprise environment with 6,000 users as we have. Email is still a thing. Over the last 30 days or so, we've received 2.5 million emails and sent ourselves over 800,000 emails. So it's still a legacy of perhaps the past, but we have to provide that because it's obviously a much better way of communicating externally with people rather than through Teams. But yes, to answer your question, Microsoft is a more cost-effective and more efficient way of providing those solutions than providing it internally. So yeah, it's something we would thoroughly recommend. As part of our data and innovation program, we're seeking to really push and emphasize the power that digital has to change the way that we work. I think it's interesting within the report we've I think it equates to about 190 grams per user per month, I think was the figure we came from the last available statistics available to us, which is half a mile driven in a car per month is effectively our footprint of using the M365 service. So it's definitely worth sticking with.
I suppose with that in mind, given I think probably most people around this table propensity to reach to email as your first kind of communication tool, how do we get people out of that as a habit, and what kind of impact might that have in the long term in terms of obviously efficiency and in terms of reducing that impact as well, because the amount of images we'll be saving and using will be less?
So training and adoption. It's about engaging with people like yourselves much more so that we can try and bring you on that journey with us. I'm a techie guy, have been for a long time, so it's easy for me to grasp these technologies, but it isn't for a lot of other people. So we need to be putting in place mechanisms and processes for helping people get on top of it, and we look forward to working with the councillors to try and encourage and increase your digital adoption and uptake of these platforms to help you collaborate, help you do better work and provide better outputs for the community.
Thank you.
Councillor Walters.
Thank you. I'm concerned about the idea of losing access to a lot of the emails we've got in the storage, just, you know, not naming any names or blaming anyone or coming up with something on the spot, but if a new council administration gets voted in, does something dodgy in the first year of that, and then it doesn't get investigated until another administration comes in for the election 4 years later, it only gives them a year to kind of look through all of that documentation and make sure that we are critiquing any decisions that were made at that time. So I am concerned by what that could do at that level. Is there any way that we can look at maybe making what we've already got more eco-friendly? Like, do Microsoft offer like a more eco-friendly Azure storage solution where perhaps the data center is exclusively powered by green power or nuclear power, rather than stopping what we're doing now, but maybe switching the source of that electricity where they've kind of pigeonholed it into specific data centers?
Thank you.
Certainly look into it, because we are in the UK and we're governed by UK GDPR. We are limited by the data centres we can use to UK specific data centres. So currently we use the one in the southeast of England and in West, which is technically Wales. And it's probably also fair to say that Microsoft prioritise other areas first when it comes to new technologies and new cooling technologies, and they're trialling things like underwater data centres, ones based in the Arctic, all that kind of stuff to try and reduce heating costs. We don't quite have that kind of facilities available in the UK yet, but I suspect that will trickle down as these technologies tend to do onto these other data centres. So currently, no, is the short answer, but I can certainly take away and look into it for you. I would say, however, that Microsoft do go a long way to offsetting their carbon footprints already. So strategically, that's why we're trying to align ourselves with singular large suppliers and suppliers that take their greenhouse gas emissions seriously.
So we're obviously rolling out some AI features as an organization, and AI is quite heavy in its energy usage. I imagine storing the prompts and storing all the information that's been put through it, is that likely to massively increase this number, irrespective of whether or not we delete these emails?
I'm as new to this as you are. So the short answer is possibly. It could offset it. We could find we reduce our storage costs, but because our use of AI increases, absolutely, it just net equalizes out. And that's something we'll be keeping an eye on, which is why we're establishing firm, governance processes and reporting mechanisms to make sure as our use of AI increases, we can track that appropriately with not just ROIs in terms of value those AI solutions are giving, but also the economic environmental impacts they could provide as well. So watch this space.
There's also mention in the report of potentially moving to on-premise. I'm sure it's not a solution that you guys want to go down at all. What features of Microsoft that we currently have would we lose if we were to move down towards that route, or anyone was to suggest that we move down towards that route?
It's really the online collaboration. Our data center downstairs is a single point of failure, we like to call it in the IT world. So it's something that if it went pop, it's gone, and we will lose access to everything. There'll be no remote access to your work, to your documents, to your emails, to your files. Microsoft's services provide us that resilience and recovery. So it's really largely resilience, in my opinion, but also the fact that they produce a far more efficient and better data centers than we could ever hope to deliver locally, especially in this building.
Completely agree. Thank you.
Councillor Dalton Gibson.
We quote the figure of the 14 megatons or whatever it was. Can you break that down? Because it strikes me that when we're talking about a 5-year storage policy, it's probably not the storage that's actually using the power. It's actually the processing. So in other words, it's the sending it, not the actual storing. Because once it's written to disk, it's just sitting there relatively inertly. And I just wondered if we had any sort of breakdown on that.
So I think as Councillor Hannah said, it's very difficult for us to drill into the data that we're provided by Microsoft. It is broken down into scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions as the greenhouse gas protocol dictates. So we can, to a degree, say what is cooling power and what is, the boxing and the packaging of the equipment that comes in, but that's as far as it goes. Storing data does still take power. These disks generate a lot of heat inside the machines. It's constant cooling required on these areas. So it's not nothing, but granted, it's very difficult for us to differentiate between the storage cost and the usage costs of the platform. So yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that question.
This is not so much the cost. A lot of this seems to, when we asked about the energy, a lot of it seems to have reverted back to talking about cost rather than energy. I was just wondered whether we could link it in with the district heat network from the last item. Cool them down and heat the houses.
I've got a question, and you're going to have to bear with me because I'm not super digital when it comes to these things. And I think most times when I get on this, I'm on the explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old kind of threads on Reddit, right? So where we've got this storage and it's all now on Microsoft 365, so it's stored in the cloud, right? And that's accessed as and when we need it, which was what makes our email searchable and whatever may be. But also we've got loads of other stuff. So all the data that we store for 5 years, what happens after 5 years? Where does that go? Is that just I've got an external hard drive in my drawer at home, which has got all my photos from years ago? Have we got that same backup facility here going back X number of years?
Yeah, and at this point, I probably need to hold my hands up around some clarity within the report and the preservation hold library that we discussed and what we're talking about, this 5-year retention policy. Preservation hold library's function is as a last resort. So once data has been deleted by the user because it has exceeded the retention policy for that data type. So to use an example, a financial record should be kept for 7 years and then deleted. So once it's deleted, from the document is deleted, the preservation hold library keeps it for a further or up to a further 5 years in a compliance hold library. So should it be needed for legal searches or email searches, for example, it can be dragged back. Once it goes beyond that 5 years, it gets deleted forever and it's irrecoverable. So our backups come first and we back up all our data every night. We retain that data for a period of 2 or 3 months, and so we can rolling record it. And then the preservation hold library kicks in once the document has been deleted by the user. So if you delete your email, a copy is stored within the preservation hold library for up to 5 years from the point of creation of that email, so that should it be needed for purposes, it could be recovered. So it just disappears after that point. It goes.
Okay, so after that point, it's not, that can't be found anymore. So
correct.
I guess, and I guess it comes away from this paper, whereas if we had something which we wanted to refer back to in, I don't know, 7 years. It's a project which is ongoing. If that's not deleted from our files and our emails or wherever it might be on our laptops, individual laptops, that's retained in perpetuity until that's deleted. Cool. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Sorry, apologies, I didn't make that clear in the report. So the 5 years is from point of deletion. So we are not deleting data after 5 years. We are not removing data after 5 years. Each service unit has a retention policy appropriate to their data. Once it's removed, we're the final sort of, last hurrah on that and recovering, being able to recover that.
Councillor Martin.
So when councillors retire or don't win their elections, are not re-elected and things like that, and or employees leave, is everything just automatically deleted off from the individual's account, and then that's the 5 years starts from that exact point, and there's no kind of like, there's nothing sitting around somewhere where there's like ghost or not dormant accounts or things like that?
Sometimes, yes. We rely on being told when people leave to delete accounts. So we have a constant sort of reporting and rigorous process every few months where we go through and check stale accounts and then challenge people if, we're not seeing activity, can we remove those accounts? But yes, broadly, once a user goes, be that a councillor or a colleague, member of staff, there's usually about a couple of months grace period where a manager is given an opportunity to go in and recover any information they might need from that account. People may have stored business information within OneDrives or Teams and things like that. After that point, it's deleted. The 5 years has kicked in from the point of creation of the document, really. So let's say your document was created now and you deleted it next year. There's a 4-year retention period because the last time the document or email was edited is the point that the clock starts ticking on the 5 years. So there's an entire possibility that if you kept hold of data for 5 years and then didn't delete it, but didn't edit it in that time either, once you delete it, it's already exceeded the 5-year policy on the last edited time on that data, so it will just go and drop off. But to answer your question, it's very rare that we have any sort of leftover data. We are quite rigorous at that these days.
Yeah, Councillor Martin, that's okay.
And just so in terms of understanding what's done with that, so because that was my original concern when I read this, I didn't obviously understand about the 5 year and it's sort of it's starting, and so my original thoughts were along Councillor Waters' lines of like, how do you ensure that stuff can't just go missing? But in terms of if you're having these conversations on Teams, within just like a Teams chat, is that all saved? Is that like just a running saved document then, and that is also stored just like an email document? Yeah.
Yes, it's part of your Exchange mailbox. So it forms part of a chat history log within your mailbox. So it's part of the preservation hold library data within your Exchange data specifically, as mentioned in the report, which is Outlook, etc. So yeah, that's stored for 5 years.
And that's still less intensive than using the email interface?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Go to Councillor Wright and then got Councillor Walters after that.
You said about discouraging email use. What alternatives are you? Are you talking about picking up the phone or just Teams?
Discouraging, I probably misused the words discouraging. All tools are available to use and you are there. However, email doesn't lend itself particularly well to collaboration in terms of live talking with people, updating documents on the fly, working alongside other people. So that's what we're really trying to encourage, especially in the hybrid working era where we're often on the end of phone calls with each other and working on documents on the fly. With emails, people tend to attach files to emails. You attach a file and send an email to 30 people, you've now created 30 copies of that document. 30 people edit that document, send their responses back to the single person. That pulse has then got to cover 30 different updates from documents and converge them into one, delete the old 30 copies. You can see where it starts to get messy. You can share links with teams through emails, and that's something we encourage and will hopefully be coming to you to train you on how to do. So don't attach links, send links, attach documents, send links. But Teams is just a bit more, I don't know, 21st century. It's just a bit of a different way of collaborating and communicating, and it's something, yeah, a more efficient way of communicating.
Also, I mean, everybody here must get, I do, get a lot of emails that are nothing to do with us. I know it's hard for any council officer to know what's nothing to do with you necessarily. If someone's talking about licensing in Highcliffe and I'm Camford Cliffs, then, you know, unless it's something I am interested in, I'm not interested in it. But also is this going to go around the whole of all the officers to discourage them from things like, you know, the email that Jenny's not in the office till Monday? I mean, that's another email. Will that be stored? Is that part of this problem? Because, you know, to me, those emails don't need to be sent.
Couldn't agree with you more. Anyone who sends me an email like that, I tend to reply on Teams and give them a response there and just go, yeah, here's your answer, and we'll carry on the discussion here if we can. But yes, it's habitual. You know, email has been in use now for what, 30 years? We've been largely using email in organisations, and it's ingrained in people's ways of working. So it's very difficult to change that overnight. However, we are putting in steps to do that as part of, you know, data and innovation work. We'll be trying to drive adoption and challenge people's ways of working. We have over 500 digital champions throughout the organisation who are experts at the M365 space, and they don't just sit in IT. These are people who are out in the business and work within departments, and their jobs are to sort of encourage and gender those ways of working amongst their colleagues. So over time it will change, but I think it's a generational shift, if I'm honest.
I hear that generational shift. I worked in construction. We were still ordering things with fax about 5 years ago, so it takes a while for some people. Councillor Walters.
I know that Microsoft licensing is quite merciless in the sense of you buy a bundle and then you've got what you've got. But is there a Microsoft license in existence where you can get all the features and all the tools that you want and then store the data potentially with a different provider that was potentially more eco-friendly?
I'm not aware of them. No. There are, however, different flavours of license, which is what we allude to in the report, which is actually we have a flagship E5 license, which gives you Word, Excel, PowerPoint on all the trimmings and all the extra add-ons. You then get an E3 license where you perhaps won't get Word and Excel, but you do get emails only and access to SharePoint and our intranet content, which is particularly good for, you know, frontline sessional workers, things like that. And that's the activity we really want to prioritise and focus in on to try and reduce that cost overhead of the Microsoft licenses, because they are expensive, but you do get a lot for your money.
Yeah, I mean, you look at any council spend on Microsoft and the numbers look eye-watering, but comparatively, if you were to try and build everything that you've got collectively together with, I don't know, if you move to Salesforce instead of, you know, Dynamics or whatever it is, you're going to have to spend a lot more money. And I think trying to pull that data center out from what you've said, it just doesn't seem like it's going to save. It would make it more expensive. It would probably make it more difficult for us to track and trace poor decisions that have been made. So, I mean, I feel like the suggestion that we should take forward as a committee, even if it's collectively the least environmentally friendly option of the two, is that, and I hate to say that, but is that we stick with what we're doing. Because I think from a security standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, there's very little we can do other than what we are doing now.
Yeah, please go on.
Thank you. So I know Mark's mentioned our data and innovation programme a couple of times and it's referenced in the paper. So that's a really key programme we're taking across the organisation at the moment that builds on all the fundamentals that we've established through the transformation programme. And as Mark alluded to, it's got a number of key work streams which we've discussed today. So about making sure that we've got a workforce and cabinet that can thrive in a digital environment and that you're working efficiently. We're giving you the tools. We're creating that mindset to work efficiently and to move forward there. We've started to look at AI and innovation and how we govern that. As Mark said, there's a key piece around data management and data governance. We have started to think about the environmental impact of AI, so that's on our radar as well. So we're in phase 1 of that, but I just wanted to provide that assurance that we're absolutely working through that and we've got our eye on it all the time, as well as the environmental, the cost and the value for money that we're getting out of that key supplier of ours as well.
Can I just ask on that, with the Microsoft license, the 365 license that we've got now, and everyone's got the E5 license, is there any way to look at how much of that license each individual exploits and then trim it down according to their need, as opposed to what we want them to do?
Yes. We've got very, very good metrics on who uses what and how much they use it. The challenge is about sort of pulling that data out and actually then enforcing it. Sometimes there are quite good reasons why people aren't, and some of it's just purely because they don't know how. And actually, if we told them how and we've got to train them better, they would use it more. So that's, yeah, it's all part of that challenge. But broadly, 100%. Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Ricketts.
Just to encourage people to try and use Teams a bit more. I'm actually a member of the Digital Champions and RC Experts and everything, and that's available for members to join as well. So, you know, if we can encourage more members to join those channels, so that, you know, if they've got problems, they can actually ask. And I don't even know if members are aware that they can actually join those channels.
No, but we are doing a lot of work, and Councillor Hannah's helping us with that. So we've done some initial work with some of our cabinet members. We've got you an assigned digital champion now. So we're really working hard as part of the key work stream, as I said, about employee member empowerment, to make sure that everyone can thrive in what we want to be, a digital leading edge authority. So yes, thank you for your support.
Councillor Rice.
Yeah, thank you. Anyway, just a possibly slightly sideways comment, but there's been a recent UN document with regards to companies that are involved in illegal occupation and plausible genocide in Gaza, and Microsoft is one of those companies. So I'm just wondering whether, if you are in communication with the company, sounds as if we're not going to be leaving them, but it may be worth mentioning to them that this is something that's come to our attention.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Hannah, do you want to make any comment on the ethics of what we use? I know it's not really put within the paper, but I think it's possibly relevant to this with Microsoft particularly, but maybe it's relevant to a bigger piece of work at some point about ethics across what we use as a council.
I wasn't aware of the report that Councillor Rice is referring to, so I can't comment on that as such. But I would share your view that if we were to start considering exactly which companies are involved in what in areas of conflict, then that is a bigger piece of work.
Thank
you. I can send you the document. It only came out within the last week, so it's a very new document from the UN. I'll share it with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Any more questions or debate on this item? No, Councillor Walters, you had the start of suggesting that we should probably go for recommendation B on this.
I did, yeah.
Do you want to?
I can formally propose that
Propose
we
that?
go with option B.
Great. Would anyone like to second? Okay. So, so just for clarity, option B is the committee supporting the continuation of activity already underway as part of the Council's Data and Innovation Programme to reassess and profile Microsoft 365 end-user licensing requirements, moving the colleagues to lower-cost licenses where appropriate. So can I have a show of hands of people in favour of that? That looks unanimous to me in the room. Thank you very much. One thing I just wanted to ask before I close this item is, I was quite surprised by the carbon footprint. I was expecting to get this report and be like, oh my God, this is awful. It's not as bad as what I thought it was, which is good news. The data which has gone into this, I think, is really good, and I can see it peaks and troughs throughout the year. We've got our online dashboard that we have for reporting the climate progress of the council. Is this something which could be continuously surfaced on there so we can monitor it?
Yeah, it's a Power BI data set we can surface it through a dashboard. I have made the data sets available to the sustainability team. I forget the lady's name. And Neil's not here anymore to ask him. But yeah, they have it available to them now, and the data's shared, and I know they're very keen to use it moving forward. So yeah, we made it available to those that can use it, and hopefully it will surface on your reports as well as part of that.
Great, thank you. Lindsay, do you just want to come in? So I've just seen your hand.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that recommendation. Was that something you just wanted to minute as is your view as a committee, or did you want to pass that comment on to Cabinet to make them aware of your view?
That's a very good point. I will pass that on to Cabinet to make them aware, if that's okay with everyone. Send it direct to them. But Councillor Hannah, you've heard that, and as a member of Cabinet, are you happy with that?
I was going to say that I very much welcome, and officers indeed also welcome, the option B recommendation, so that will not be a problem at all. And while I've got the floor, if I could just express appreciation to the officers whose expertise is clear and way above anything that I could have offered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the clarification on where that was going, Lindsay. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming in. It's been really enlightening. I was quite surprised to read a lot in that, so it's been really, really useful. Thank you for coming in. Our next item is item 8 on the Clifton coastal erosion. We are going to go over 8 o'clock, which is our normal scheduled time for this meeting. So do people want a quick 5-minute comfort break? Okay, so it's 7:42. If we come back at, let's call it 10 to 8. And I'll see you then. Thank you. we're going to continue on with item 8, which is coastal and cliff erosion management across BCP coast. We've got Councillor Andy Hadley again to introduce this paper, and also Matt Hosey from the SN team, who I believe you have a presentation for us, Matt, to introduce this. Do you want to introduce it a little bit first, Councillor Hadley, or go straight into the presentation?
Ever so briefly. So I think this arose from a scrutiny request actually from my colleague, from Councillor Herriot. Obviously its importance to tourism, but it's also really important in terms of habitation, and the way in which we get money from government is based on homes at risk of flooding. And so Matt and the team have been really successful in and are very well regarded, as I understand, in covering this area. So I'll hand over to the expert, if you don't mind, and see what we go from there. Thank you.
Yeah, please, if we can have the presentation, and then we'll get stuck into some question afterwards.
Okay, thank you. I'll just try and share my screen so you can see the presentation. Bear with me a minute. I need to pull the presentation up. Can you see that okay? I'll just go into the slideshow as well. Being a bit slow. There we go. Is that all being shared? Okay. Right. Okay. So I'm Matt Hosey, head of flood and coastal erosion risk management. I think the question primarily centred around the cliff, the cliff environment. So talking to Councillor Herriot, we've focused the paper and the presentation on our cliff zone, as it were. The questions were really about how we manage in that area. What are the challenges within the cliff area? How is the work funded? How will it be funded in the future? And also, how do we communicate the work we're doing to our wider public? So a few reminders for us. Our cliff areas really are predominantly on the open coast. We've got 15.5 miles of cliff, just under 1.5 of which is in private ownership. And so that's predominantly along the Bournemouth Pool frontage, and on the Avon Beach Friars Cliff frontage as well, in Highcliffe. We've got a real spread of different types of geology. We've got a real spread of different types of risk, depending on the use of the cliff. We've got various owners, as I mentioned, and obviously different liabilities depending on what use the cliff areas are being used for. An important point to make, and this is made in the paper, is around the difference between coastal erosion and coastal instability. From our perspective, we've got funding for coastal erosion, so a lot of the works that we do, which afford protection to our cliff environment, is for coastal erosion. So all of the groins and beach replenishment, all the bits that prevent that sort of buffer area from being eroded back, we can access national grant and aid for. However, coastal instability, so where we get cliff slips through groundwater infiltrating through from landward towards the sea, which causes instability, we don't get funding for those risks. So they're quite different elements that we deal with. Some reminders here in the pictures of quite historic cliff slips that we've had over the past few decades. It's not always obvious, but when you look at aerial photographs, you can see the scalloping of certain areas where we might now have zigzag paths or other uses at the toe of the cliffs. There's quite a lot of evidence to show that we've had landslides throughout our history, really, and we make use of some of those areas too now. They've become part of the cliff environment. We've also had more recent slips, which most of us will be aware of, whether it be the East Cliff lift. We've had the recent West Cliff slip as well, which we've obviously got works ongoing on site at the moment, where we're weighting the toe of the cliff. So, yeah, more recent ones, particularly in the last sort of couple of decades, where we've probably seen an increase in the amount of groundwater that we're experiencing as well, bringing that to the fore. So, a real history of instability. Taking us back farther to understand how we manage the whole environment, back into the 1800s, where we started developing on the seafront, as it were. We then started putting seawalls in front of the cliff because we realised actually the cliffs were receding back pretty quickly, and towards the developments that we had made. When the seawalls were put in, they reflected wave energy. They started scouring the beach, so they weren't working in full. So then we started looking at the retention of beach material through putting in groin fields, trying to keep the beach in place. That then moved on to also putting in cliff drainage and cliff stabilisation measures within the cliff. So between the 1950s and 1990s, an awful lot of infrastructure was put within our cliffs, which in the main is invisible. So a lot of drainage infrastructure, cut-off walls, which we don't actually necessarily see from day to day, is within our cliffs to prevent that water from pushing out. And then in the more recent years, a lot more of our coast protection on beach renourishment and the groins, again, trying to make sure we've got a big beach in front of our what are predominantly failed seawalls, so that we don't get the sea attacking the toe of the cliffs and reactivating that cliff erosion. So a bit of a pathway there of the various processes we've gone through over the decades to try and stop our cliffs eroding back. Some examples in the slides there of the type of real sort of heavy civils works that are within the cliff environment. So sheet piling to create terraced areas. We've also got counterfort drains, so big drains to take the water out of the cliff areas. Some of these pictures here are, like I say, 1950s. We've also got a serious amount of sand drains on the cliff. This again is predominantly the Bournemouth frontage. So we think there are around 730 sand drains. So these are vertical drains that go down predominantly along the road line. You can see the alignment on the map there. So they intercept water that's on groundwater that's coming through towards the seafront. They go down the drains and then they drain out within the seawalls, as it were, within the promenade. So we've found just over 500 of those, but on record there's over 700 which were put in historically. So significant civils infrastructure to drain that water as it comes through. Also measures like regrading the gradient of the cliff, so trying to get to an angle which is more stable, plus seeding with the type of vegetation that will help reduce that potential of cliff slipping, like heather. So that's been done historically. We don't see a lot of that now, but we've done that where we've had landslips, and we're just stabilising sort of smaller areas. But that was done on a broader scale. And last example here is Highcliffe. Nice historic aerial there showing the quite active landslipping on Highcliffe back in the day, the 1940s. And then after some pretty serious cliff drainage works, is a more recent aerial trying to show the exact same area. So you can see the stabilised cliff frontage with all the pathways on and the coast protection as well in front of it, the groins and the beach material being retained, all acting to stabilise that cliff top. There's quite a good example there. Anyone who goes to the Highcliffe frontage, if you look east over Nash Beach, you can just about see it in the aerial. That's still an area where there's no coast protection, there's no cliff drainage, and you get a real idea of what our cliffs would look like if we didn't do those works. When I first graduated, I did a job on Nation Engineers Report looking at the cliff erosion. It was over 2 meters per year of the cliff top that we were seeing recession. So pretty serious recession, and would be pretty similar if we didn't do coast protection works or cliff drainage works. From our perspective, having started our FCERM service when we started BCP Council, we recognised that there were some needs for undertaking more maintenance. It's true to say that our cliff drainage infrastructure that's put in through the 50s to the 90s, a lot of the knowledge that was in-house, which put in those heavy engineering works and maintained those over the years, has been lost over time. There was a relatively ad hoc or unclear approach to how it was maintained and how that was managed. In the legacy authorities, that was done in different ways. But certainly the sort of geotechnical expertise wasn't retained in-house, and there was a lot of reliance on consultancy support for what became more reactive working when issues arose. So, as I mentioned before, grant and aid we could get for coastal erosion schemes. So, for example, our Pool Bay Beach Management Scheme, £36 million, we've got grant and aid for that. But the ongoing maintenance and any needs for cliff infrastructure not paid for. And obviously we've seen a big reduction in revenue funding for coastal maintenance works over the last couple of decades. So so the maintenance funding internally has not been available. What are we doing about it? So on starting the service, we applied for just over £400,000 of local levy to start a cliff management strategy so we can start building that understanding again. That strategy aims to provide a real sort of a single approach so that all services within BCP can access that guidance and use that guidance, whether it be for planning decisions or for maintenance or for response on site from seafront. For all the different users could use that cliff management strategy to make the right decisions. We've led on that as an FCERM team. We've recruited expertise, so we've got an expert geotechnical engineer, and we've now got another graduate geotechnical engineer working with them to really try and get that knowledge back in-house again. We've also set about producing the strategy in line with industry best practice. And the first port of call, it was really doing it as like an asset management cycle. So actually starting to log all of our cliff environment into an asset database, as it were, so we could really understand all the areas we've got on our cliffs. That database, as you can see from the slide, pretty complex. We've looked at all the individual areas on the cliff, depending on the characteristics they've got. We've split it into just over 190 different assets all along, which need identification in their own right because of like I say, the characteristics they've got. We've split it also into a risk-based classification so that we can understand which ones need prioritising if there's any actions or monitoring required. And I would say, because we've got you know, an awful lot of our frontage is a high tourism need, it does sway that risk-based approach to a fairly high risk because of people using our cliff environment. But we're really gathering that evidence. As you know, it's a really positive step for us to make sure we retain that knowledge as well. In the sense of the cliff management strategy, that's also leading to what we're calling a management manual. So I talked about all the inter-service use of that manual when it comes out. It's going to be finished in March next year. But all of the information around our cliffs and chines, there'll all be the monitoring and inspection regime that we use. We've got, again, in-house GPS surveyors, drone pilots. We've got LiDAR capable drones. We're really building that ability to monitor and understand what that risk looks like for us. Also, what we need to do from a maintenance perspective, how we interact with people, I don't know, the environment services. We've got goats on the cliffs, for example, whether it be planning in line with policy on what we allow in with developments or soakaways, that type of thing, and also with our emergency planners with what we should be looking at for triggers. So a manual to help all of that service interaction in a single consistent way. So yeah, finishing that this financial year. Actions that we've taken to date, we got that funding in 2022. So we've been going for over 2 years on the cliff management strategy. In the very early stages, we recognised the risk that we've got with the lack of maintenance and lack of understanding that we had within the council that we're now building. We reported that to DMT very early. We formed what we call a cliff management working group as one of the recommendations of that report. And we've got governance in place with directors, SRO positions to make sure that we are reporting on, monitoring efficiently and taking the appropriate actions on a priority basis for the issues that we do see arising. So far to date, we've invested about £750,000 over the last couple of years on various monitoring, on stability assessments, detailed designs, where we've needed, on a priority basis, as I mentioned, where we've needed to undertake work to gain that understanding and to inform future works for stabilising priority areas. And also, obviously, health and safety measures, if we're cordoning off, closing sections of the prom, for example, making sure we're making proportionate and correct decisions on that front. We've also been lucky enough to access some of the LUF funding for the East Cliff lift. So you can see there remediation design and movement of an SSE transformer as well, which is in that risk area. So that's what's been delivered and funded over the last couple of years. Future challenges. Obviously, climate change poses a real challenge for us. We're seeing more and more extremes. We're seeing it on the news every week, whether that be global issues. We're seeing more rainfall. We're seeing bigger extremes. So the big rainfall events which might cause issues on our cliff environment. The lack of national funding is a big issue for us. So we need to find that as a council for any works that we do. And with the works we've done today, we're estimating over the next 20 years a likely expenditure of around £40 million to keep that cliff drainage infrastructure working properly. So a real need to think strategically on how we fund over the longer term, really, to keep that functioning properly. Similarly, with funding revenue services to keep those skills in-house, it's much more expensive to work reactively and work with consultants. And then longer term, that sea level rise, where we go on our coastal frontage, at what point in the future, and we're talking probably a couple of decades, 3 decades, when will beach nourishment no longer be viable because the sea levels are too high? When will we need to raise prom heights or build the prom bigger to accommodate what that means for us? And that could be integrated with improved cliff drainage infrastructure as well. So it could be, there's opportunities there if funding becomes available to integrate that with coast protection. And lastly, how are we communicating with residents? So as part of the strategy, we have been going out to residents. We've got live surveys with residents to understand what they need to know about the cliffs. We are working with Dorset Coastal Forum to come up with a sort of a guide, as it were, for householders, a more basic sort of approach to what we do, what decisions need to be made, what they need to know as members of the public, where the responsibilities lie with householders, for example. And a similar thing was done on the North Swanage frontage a few years ago. So using the same team at Dorset Coastal Forum, we're at the moment rolling out a similar communication through all of our residents so that we can build that understanding and work with them to allow them to understand and educate what we're doing. And I've got a link on the slide that I understand the presentation will be shared with everybody. So that link will take us through to our webpage where all of what I've just talked about is contained, plus the survey that I've just talked about. And that's the end.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting and really in depth. I appreciate it for an explainer for because when I was working my way through the report, there was some bits that I was getting a little bit lost in, and that's really cleared up quite a few of the questions I had actually. So one question that really stuck out to me, and you've not quite answered it with the report, is there seems to have been a good knowledge, and a lot of civils went into the cliffs to prevent erosion historically, and then there was a gap of a period of time, sort of like around the 90s, something like that, where it was like, oh, the cliffs are stable now. So, well, maybe it wasn't that, maybe it was something else, or there was no funding, as you said as well. So how many of the more recent slips have been down to that period of just letting things be and not being proactive? And how many are completely unpredictable and no matter what we did would still occur?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's probably hard to put an exact answer to it, but there's no doubt that if we had a more active maintenance regime, then we'd probably see less of the landsliding that we've had. Obviously, some of it's down to extreme events, so it's hard to gauge exactly what the difference would be. So yeah, and I think that erosion of engineering knowledge is probably something we see around much of our coastline. Actually, I think there's an awful lot of civils works on our coast nationally in the 50s, 60s, seawalls, etc. And actually, you'll probably find in most authorities that engineering capability, resource amount has diminished somewhat. We've certainly seen quite a drastic decrease in revenue funding for various service areas, and I guess where it's an area where it's non-statutory, where you work under permissive powers, it's an area where a lot of authorities have seen the amount of engineering resource, lessen, I suppose, over the years. So we wouldn't be alone in that. I think the good news for us is where the way we're working, particularly from an FCERN perspective, where we've grown the team because we're being really active on the permissive powers, is we're now rebuilding that knowledge and creating systems so that we can retain that knowledge in-house, so it's there for anyone to pass it on to.
Thank you. Sorry, I just launched straight into the question in there. Councillor Herrick, this was one of your other parting gift to us. So would you like to ask anything that you like?
So I just checked the date, and actually I brought it in February. And that was partially in response to some of the slips we'd seen and the challenges that we have. And I'd like to think that I've developed quite a reasonable amount of knowledge in this area through my portfolio work and understanding. But I think firstly, like, I think we're really fortunate to have the team that we do and the knowledge that we have within the council. I think a lot of other areas in the country are really jealous, would be really jealous of what we've got. In fact, I think we hire out the facility. That's how jealous they might be. And I think what I really wanted to highlight was the challenges around balancing that revenue spend. I think £40 million of revenue across 20 years to really kind of maintain the drains at a really high level. That is money that is, you know, from the general fund, which we all, you know, we hear on repeat and we talk about on repeat, is under such significant pressure, and the challenges it creates on the seafront, where actually we're firstly funding having to deal up, having to clear up the cliff, but also fund mitigation measures in the meantime, and then losing revenue. For example, this year, obviously the ability to run the land trade in the way we have historically has been really affected. And actually, I don't really have much in the way of questions. I'm really grateful that we've got to kind of shed a really big light on this and really demonstrate to the public what the issue is. The beach being 2 meters higher than it was 20, 30 years ago is a highlight. I think people think we've just piled a load of sand on to make it a really nice beach resort, but actually it's kind of protecting 6,000 homes around the area. So, but yeah, I think I may well come up with some more questions, but I'd just be grateful to what the committee have to say as well.
Councillor Walters.
The 41 million on the reports, does that factor in, you know, the expenses when it comes to sea level rises, increased, you know, drastic weather events, and potentially even population increase and an increase in number of properties at the top of the cliffs?
It's a loose estimate really, but it's based on, you know, capital needs for replacement of some of the drainage infrastructure. I think weather events are the biggest issue for us when you talk about population. Obviously, yes, we've got drainage infrastructure, and you might have bigger pressure on that population, but it's really the overall groundwater levels which are the biggest implication for what landsliding we get. I think when we talk about the revenue funding, it's probably fairly sporadic as well, because we're at the moment working quite reactively. So I'll use West Cliff as an example. We're just doing the design on that at the moment and understanding the needs for a design, but from a contractor's feedback, we're probably looking at £5 to £6 million to do the works there. So that's like a one-off hit for a reactive working. So it's a mixture of estimating where we might have reactive works happening, plus the need to spend revenue on sand drain clearance and things like that as well. So it's an engineer's estimate really on what that looks like, with our understanding of what the infrastructure condition is at the moment. So yeah, it's not an exact science, unfortunately, but certainly the maintenance aspects we can probably put a better figure on for the general revenue spend.
Thank you. And you mentioned 6,000 properties on the coast that are at risk. Do we have any kind of estimation as to the combined value of the properties that are currently at risk to these events?
Yes, so I haven't got the exact figures with me, but the strategy we've got in place. So there's the Poole Bay to Wareham strategy, which our business case for the Poole Bay Beach Management Scheme, which is the beach nourishment and the groins, will have the figures in, the economic figures in for that loss. So the 6,000 properties figure was the estimation of the number of properties that will be lost over the next 100 years. So that was used to justify the £36 million we were talking about for the scheme. But it's significant, obviously. I'd have to refer back to the strategy to get the exact housing figures. You got that, Richard?
Councillor Herrick just turned his laptop round. I think it's a rough estimation, but it's 1.5 billion pounds or so.
That's based on a relatively low £250,000 property.
Yeah, that would be low for our area. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Not an insignificant sum. Councillor Ricketts.
Thank you. Is there now a programme for sand drain maintenance, and are they what condition are they in? Because they've not been maintained for some time.
Yeah.
And obviously there's no point in having the drains unless they're going to work, because that in itself can cause issues. So do we now have a planned maintenance programme for that? And are you actively looking for the missing 200?
We certainly are looking for the missing 200. So at the moment, we've undertaken drainage clearance. So that involves a vacuum truck sucking out the tubes basically and getting rid of the detritus within that. We've done that in priority areas where we've had some of the recent cliff slips, and we're doing inspections of the remaining drains. Some are in a poor state and have a lot of sort of rust within the tubes, as it were. So ferrous oxide, blocking those too. So some might need replacement. At the moment, we're working with managers to understand what funding is available to undertake the priority drainage. So we haven't yet got a funded full programme for the whole drainage system, but via the Cliff Management Working Group, we're raising that priority. We're raising that pressure in the budgets to say we think we need to do X, Y, and Z to undertake clearance of all of the sand drains. The way we're going to tackle that initially is do some dipping of the drains. So understanding how much blockage there is within them. So if we dip down and actually they're pretty clear, we know they're working right. But the ones that we know are less clear, we'll focus on getting those cleared first, and then work back really to clear the ones which are seeing less blockage at the moment. But we haven't got the full funding. I think it would talk about £250,000 was the figure that my geotechnical engineer told me yesterday for the clearance of all of them. So yeah, we're working on a priority basis to try and get them all done in time.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Goodall.
I just wanted to ask a question. When the report says not all private landowners seem to be aware of responsibilities and liabilities, is it that difficult to tell them what their responsibilities? Is it that they say no, they're not going to do it, or how?
Yeah, some of it's around education, where people might not realise that perhaps actions they might take as a property owner are detrimental to cliff stability. Like, I don't know, putting in a swimming pool on your cliff top, or putting in soak-away drainage too close to the cliff edge, that type of thing. So what we're able to do through the strategy that we're putting together and the manual that we're producing, particularly for our planners as well, is having that ability to inform when needed, when for planning applications, for example, that's a good example of saying that, but also around educating. So we're doing the communication at the moment, going out to all the householders so they understand responsibilities, they understand what the cliff environment entails in the sense of works that are required, or how we look after the frontage. We're able to communicate and provide that guidance for them. So that last slide I showed, actually still on the screen, producing that householder's guide is something that is the type of thing we're going to produce, so that we can actually distribute to all of our residents along the cliff top.
So can I just ask how many residences are we referring to? Is it many, or is it? Yeah, well, sorry, looking at the maps, I thought that there were private areas and that, and a landowner owned that length of.
I don't know how many residents it is. I do know we've got 1.4 miles of privately owned cliff frontage. Okay. So I couldn't give you the number of properties offhand. I can find it for you.
That's all right.
But it's 1.4 miles of
but it's
privately
split
owned
into small sections.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of that will be in the chine areas. It might be as well. So yeah.
So can I just ask, Chair? So with the bigger landowners that we lease off.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is a daft question coming up, but is there any way we can, in terms of costs, we can end the leases and hand it back to the landowners to take responsibility for the work?
Do you want to answer that?
I don't think that's such an issue here. Looking at the map, I think the biggest landowner we've probably got is the NHS, I guess. But most of those I think will be private, because most of them are away from the areas where we've got the really significant leaseholders on the seafront.
Just to push on that a little bit further, actually, in the report itself on point 36, it says the leasehold locations, permissions to access the land And do these works need to obtain from the relevant landowners such as Merrick Estates and Cooper Dean Estates? Maybe a question for Councillor Herrott or Hadley. Do they understand the importance of this and like how these cliffs are an asset and that this is a problem, and as leaseholders, if we need to do work, we should be able to get access to their land? Or are they particularly not interested in listening to us? And if they're not, how do we get them to come on board and make sure that we can do the work that we need so we can keep our cliffs?
So I have been involved in some discussions with Merrick Estate, and they are interested. They're very keen. They value the work that Matt and his team do. I think in terms of where the responsibilities lie, and also other issues that perhaps we have as tenants of their estate, there's a whole list and a very complicated web of things that we have to work with them on, and sometimes issues get collided, shall I say.
Okay, so there's not some big barrier to it all as such. Okay, moving on then, I've got Councillor Walters first.
Just a question about the communications going out to the residents. So I know that, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the name of this town is, but there's a town in Wales that's so at risk from climate change that the owners of those houses can no longer, buyers of those houses can no longer get mortgages to buy them.
Yeah.
With the significant risk that's going out in these documents, are we mentioning kind of the worst case scenario to these people that, you know, if these aren't solved, your houses buyers won't be able to get a mortgage, and therefore your property is effectively worthless if the worst case scenario were to happen? Because, and not that we want to necessarily scare people, but that is the realistic thing that could happen if these cliffs come down.
Yeah, we're fortunate to be in a position where, because of the density of our population, we've got a good viable business case for the coast protection element, so the coastal erosion element. So, you know, I compared to the Nace Cliffs that I talked about just east of Highcliffe. You know, if it was unprotected, it would look like that, and it would be a serious risk for our residents. So in the FSERM strategy that's in place, because that was EA led, actually Environment Agency led, that's pretty clear, and we're quite clear in that for the Christchurch Bay and Harbour strategy that we've just completed. So, you know, what I would say is because we're able to access grant and aid to do the coast protection element, it becomes less of a risk. It's a real balance, because you don't want to scaremonger either, because we are doing something about it as an authority, and we're doing, you know, serious amounts of work about it, because we've got the £36 million beach management scheme. We're looking now at funding for continuing coast protection for Christchurch frontages as well, for Avon and Friars Cliff. So at the moment, because of that coast protection, we are in a position where the cliff landslide risk is much less, because the toe is protected. Even if we had a landslip, we get to a certain sort of angle of repose of the cliffs, as it were, so a shallower angle, which hopefully would stabilise. So it's not going to be activated or reactivated like it would if we lost coast protection. That would put us in a much more serious position, because then you're steepening the cliff all the time, because that erosion would eat it back. It would steepen up and it would slip again, like I'm talking about in Nace Cliff. So the information is in there within the strategies, but I wouldn't broadcast it as a serious risk, because I think we're managing it well as an authority. So it's managing that perception of what the risk means to them at the moment.
Councillor Hadley, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, it may be helpful, and Matt's referred to it several times, but we have two strategies. We have a pool-based strategy and a Christchurch-based strategy, and obviously we're working with our adjacent authority areas, but we have a hold the line policy, which is that with the help of the Environment Agency and the defences that we've put in place, that we are trying to hold the position of the cliff. You mentioned Wales. I think there's also in the North East some communities where the house owners are having to dismantle their houses at their cost and retreat, because that area, the sea defence can't be afforded, and so it's a managed retreat. And it's a managed retreat on Studland Beach as well. So that's why the cafe went on Studland Beach, and one storm moves the cliff back quite a significant way. So it's down to the good work actually of Matt and his team, you know, in very recent times, but also the engineers historically that have managed to do it based on where we are. It could be, you know, if climate change moves at a much faster rate than we expect, that the environment actually turn around and say, no, we can't afford to give you any money anymore, or the availability of sand to prop up the toe of the cliff is, you know, it becomes a real challenge. And again, we've been doing some work trying to protect the sand as it circulates around the bays, and to bring that ashore, but also to stop other people taking it away, so it doesn't go out of the system. So there's been some real systems thinking in terms of how we can best look after our defence, but ultimately it comes down to available money, and that could dry up.
And just off the back of that, so that stopping of the circulation of sand, does that then create issues further on down the line? Because obviously with things like longshore drift, the sand would end up in places like Barton-on-Sea, which has seen significant erosion. So in solving the problem here, are we effectively making it someone else's problem that maybe doesn't have the money for these defences?
That's a really good point, and yeah, I mean that's why our industry sector has really moved towards a much more joined up way of working around the nation. So we've got shoreline management plans around the whole of the nation now, and those shoreline management plans are divided up into management units, and they really take much more care in understanding what the neighbouring frontages look like. Go back a few decades, and there was none of that. Something would have been decided as a scheme; it would have been built. And if there were impacts on his next door neighbours, then it was then recognised later on. Now there's much more understanding of setting those policies that Councillor Hadley was just talking about, whether it's hold the line, whether it's manage realignment or advance the line even, or no active intervention. One of those policies will be set, but it will be looked across a much broader region for each shoreline management plan to make those decisions.
But if I may, Chair, but that does tie the Nash Farm and that area, because it's rural. It doesn't have the houses at risk, and therefore it doesn't have the money, and so it is managed retreat. And that's why on the image that Matt showed earlier, you see at Tune Bunny, the end of the High Cliff beach. The cliff is natural and degrading away because it's not a managed to line. But that strategy that we have is working with New Forest District Council and takes you right the way to Hurst Spit when the Environment Agency take over for Hurst Spit itself. And so, as Matt says, it is continuous, and we work the other way with Dorset Council in terms of things Dustin and further to the west. So yeah, it's as continuous as we can make it, but with different policies in place on different bits of the coast.
Absolutely. And to shed some light on what you said earlier about that sort of competition for funding, as it were, we're towards the end now of a 6-year period of funding from the Environment Agency, which comes down from DEFRA. £5.2 billion over a 6-year period, which nationally, that's the grant and aid I'm talking about, that we can put business cases in for to try and get funding for our projects. So it's permissive powers. You don't have to be bidding for that funding. So we use those permissive powers to try and get the funding for our best interests. But we're obviously in competition with the rest of the nation, and actually some areas, and the Norfolk coastline is a really good example as well. You've got somewhere there might be a handful of houses, but the scheme would be 10, 15 million to solve it. So actually, it just doesn't stack up as a business case. So unfortunately, the householders are needing to, as Councillor Andy said, allow for demolition of the houses and retreat of the cliffs. So we can't afford to build a fortress around the whole of our nation. It's just where the priority areas sit.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Councillor Martin, and then I've got Councillors Wright and McCrow, and then I think after those speakers we'll probably try and wrap this item up unless there's anything pertinent from what they say. So, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just again on this sort of community, householder, landowner engagement. So that happens at a point in time, imminently now.
Yeah.
What is the ongoing? Is there any sort of, so for instance, I don't know what the turnover is on some of these properties in the ownership, but is there something where we know that obviously a house changes hands, and is someone saying, welcome to your new home, this is what we expect of you, rather than sort of every however long we would have to do that to sort of go around again and remind people of what should be happening there?
Yeah, I don't think there's any plans for that as such yet. We're just going out to the community to understand what sort of guidance they would want. But I think in this day and age, having everything available digitally and on our websites and social media, I think keeping that live rather than individual house communication or letter drops is probably the way we'd try and drive that. So yeah, it's early doors for us. I don't know how we'd approach change of ownership. That's not something that we've discussed within the team.
Councillor Hadley, did you want to add something there?
It's actually a question or something perhaps to take away. Obviously, land registry is a place that you do a search as you buy a property, and perhaps where there should be some information that we feed into that to go, these houses you need to know about the cliffs. As part of that package, so people know. It could, though, create a problem for people selling the houses because people might go, "Oh my God, I'm not going there." But I don't know. That's something we need to explore. I think.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Did you want to follow on from that?
Well, I'll just say, yeah, because I just know on the railway, certain properties, if certain property sort of covers the line, or with particularly with crossing points and that, they might expect a visit from Network Rail to sort of say, it's not probably on this kind of scale, but I do know that can go on in sort of other places where kind of specialist information being imparted to homeowners, where they sort of come into cross boundaries with the railway, that kind of information is given out. So I just thought probably we don't have the money to do it to that sort of scale, but like you're saying, if there was some sort of note somewhere, and it wasn't affecting people's house insurance, home insurance and things like that and causing issues for them, but just to make people more aware as they come into a property that you're entering a space now where you really are a guardian of keeping up with, you have to, you've got a lovely home with a great view, and you need to play your part within the community and take stewardship of that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and actually it's something which is prevalent for a lot of what we do as a service. Flood and coastal erosion risk. When houses are within flood risk, within flood mapping sort of risk areas, as it were, how do we go about communicating that? And it's a real careful balance, as Councillor Hadley just said, because if you're proactive in potential new residents, telling them actually you're at a flood risk, then as an authority, you put yourself in a fairly tricky position. So I think the key thing is making sure the data and information is transparent and readily available online, which is what the Environment Agency tried to do with flood risk mapping, for example. And they've also now, just gone to do with coastal erosion risk mapping as well. So that is all nationally available. And as we'll probably say within our guidance, every householder has a responsibility for their own flood and coastal risk. So when they choose to buy a house or whatever it is, they should be looking at that sort of data. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, I think so. And I think people who are buying properties on the coast, with the way that things are, it's quite reticent on them to think about these things and consider it. I guess the big question is, how far back is it relevant? And that comes from the work that you're doing to work out where these assets are and where it becomes. And as that data surfaces, people have more of an idea of it. So something to definitely bear in mind. Councillor Wright.
Do the landslips mainly take place where the heather is, or it seems to me whenever I've seen them, there's the odd tree on a landslip, but it's mostly the small vegetation and the heather, which only has like 4 or 5 inch roots, and the bigger, more established trees are there for a start, so they have obviously never slipped. And if that's the case, why aren't we planting trees with bigger roots and having things like goats that eat small trees?
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to fit with a strategy, but I may be wrong.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, there are differences in vegetation, and you might find that there's less established vegetation where the cliff movement is more prevalent. So there's probably links there. Some trees aren't good for the cliff. It depends on the type of vegetation that's there, actually. So some trees which might have roots which dry out the area too much or have their own destabilizing effects, we have had removed. So there've been some tree removal recently because of the size of them. Some low-lying shrubs aren't good either because of the weight of the shrubs and the shallower roots. So it really depends on the type of vegetation. The size of it isn't necessarily the answer there. It's the type of vegetation that we've got.
Councillor Hadley.
Yeah, we did have an issue where we had to take quite a big tree down on the cliff, and I talked to Julian about that issue. And it's sometimes the bigger trees are actually, they're acting as levers, and particularly when you get a big wind, the tree will pull the cliff down. or a bit of the cliff down, or it might start a cliff fall. So sometimes trees are actually a bad idea in that regard. I think some cover is better than no cover, and it is about finding the right way to do that, to stabilise the cliff.
Thank you. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you. It's not a question. It's just literally to for Councillor Waters and Martin on point 44, and it says about the developer's household guide, and there's a dedicated website for cliff and chine management. So it's got for residents to get that info. And also, thank you for mentioning the goats, because they are quite a tourist attraction.
Yeah, and that website is actually linked. So when you receive the presentations, that link that's on that last slide there, I'll click on it if you like, see if that works. That's our website, and you can see there the cliff management area within it. So it's got a lot of what we've just talked about today. It links down. It's also got the have your say bit there, that bit around how we're communicating with the public at the moment. That's all on there with the survey, etc. So yeah, feel free to visit that, and if you've got other questions, feel free to come back to us as a service to answer them.
Thank you. Just before we wrap up, I've got a couple of questions. One of them is probably a question which you hear quite a lot. Is cliff lift? Obviously, it's quite an important asset that either we need to know, will it be repaired? Will something be happening to it? Is it stuck in a funding situation at the moment? Is it even plausible that with the state of the cliff in that area at the moment, that is something which could be brought back into use at all?
Yeah, so we are undertaking assessments on that at the moment. So we've been working with our professional service consultants as well to get the detailed designs done. I think there's further ground investigations needed, and the estimated costs coming back from contractors at the moment is higher than what was anticipated. I think we're looking at £5 to £6 million estimated costs. So the funding for that isn't secured yet. So that will be wending its way through the appropriate routes to get approvals if works are going to happen. So I can't answer if they are or not yet, because it's works underway.
I think that's a good enough answer at the moment, that cost is certainly a barrier for a lot of things at the moment, and 5 to 6 million is not a small amount of money.
It's not
at all.
No.
The other thing, I have to agree, I think our cliffs are a massive asset, not just in what they do, the protection that they offer across BCP against rising sea levels, the general force of the sea as well, but also the biodiversity, which is the history, a lot of that which I didn't have as much knowledge of as I do now. And I think we can draw some attention to this. It is a tourist attraction. It's not just the goats and the odd lizard and a nice view. This is important. So I think having some sort of information boards, notice boards for what has actually gone on, if I was visiting, I'd find that something really interesting to look at. So maybe just something for you, Councillor Herrick, to consider when we're looking at what we can spend our funding for tourism on. Maybe a bit more information points might be nice about what we've actually got to offer besides the sand and the towns and the cafes and restaurants, the actual nature which is sitting right there, which you're staring at when you're sunbathing.
I really like that suggestion. And there's a word for it, and I can't remember that describes the boards that would do that. But yeah, whether we can kind of reach into funding pots to try and kind of do some work on that, that's either alongside the work that's done in the future, or from LUF funding, or things that are in that arena, we'll certainly have a look.
Thank you. The final thing, just before I say thank you very much, the cliff management strategy, I think we'd probably all love to see that once it's finished, and maybe have a presentation on that and how it is, perhaps something which is open to all members just before or just after its publication. I think it's a really vital piece of work which is going to form part of the history of this area as we protect the cliffs. So if we can, as a committee, get some information on the progress of that over time and when it's likely to be published, that'd be really good. And then we can perhaps arrange a briefing for all the members.
Absolutely. March next year is when we're programmed to finish. So
great, thank you. Well, thanks very much for bringing that to us, Matt, and Councillor Hadley as well. Really appreciate it, and always really interesting to hear about the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you.
And for the rest of the committee, that brings us on to item 9, which is our work plan. There's a few bits and pieces on this, which hopefully shouldn't take too long, and we should be finished around just before 9 o'clock. We've got Lindsay online, who I might invite to just input into this item a little bit, if you'd like to. Lindsay, just give us a little bit of a introduction on where we're at the moment.
Yep, thank you, Chair. There are a few smaller bits to raise with you, but I wonder if first of all you'd like me to cover the van life scrutiny request, which is on your work plan for September.
I think that's a good place to start, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just give a very brief background just to bring members back up to speed with this. This is on your work plan, date to be scheduled, or it was a date to be scheduled. Chair has advised that we should aim for a session in September on this. Originally, this came through from a council motion. Council asked the E&P committee to establish a community pact for all vehicle dwellers, for the committee to consider the detail of this pact. No further information than that. Councillor Cooper has engaged in this as the original proposer of the motion. He has said in the past to you as a committee that this is a cross-conurbation identified issue. There are a few known other councils that have policies on this. And BCP could be a leader in this. He particularly highlighted that van lifers have no protected characteristics and that we could be brave in enhancing our support for them. So the aim of a community pact would be to look wider than the housing needs or the location needs of van dwellers, but look at the balancing the needs of van dwellers with the concerns of residents and the wider community, and endeavour through that to meet all needs, including issues such as public health, safety and the environment. So when you discussed this as a committee before and in full council, some of the key comments that came forward were that as a committee you would see that you could add value to this by getting direct input from residents and from van dwellers so that you could understand what those needs were rather than assuming them and trying to write up a pact or a policy. So with that in mind, we have been asking for a bit of direction on how you want to approach this in terms of scrutiny. I know that as chair, you have consulted the committee and got some ideas that have come through. And then as chair, you've proposed a set of key lines of inquiry that encapsulate those different views. So if I just, would you like me to read those out, Chair?
Yes, yeah, you can do, please.
Yeah, if I just run through what they are, and then perhaps if we pause there for you to discuss them, and then we could come back to how we plan to move this forward. So the chair's proposed a set of 6 key lines of inquiry, I think, which are: what are the needs of those who choose to live in vans locally? What are the needs of those who culturally live in or travel in vans, i.e. Gypsy Roman traveller communities? What are the needs of those who end up living in vans or other vehicles due to circumstances, i.e. homelessness? What are the needs of those who travel to BCP in their vans? What is the impact to residents in particularly densely populated parking spots? And how can BCP Council provide for all of the above, particularly noting the rise of people choosing or otherwise to live in vehicles? So if the committee could just take a moment to consider those and whether those are your suitable key lines of inquiry that you would like to confirm, that would be really helpful.
Thank you, Lindsay. What I'm just going to do is actually send those on Teams while we've been told that it's the best way to communicate with each other. And I'll send it to our meeting here so people can see what they are. Hopefully that's come through all right. What you'll notice is some of those are highlighted, which is the first 4, which are all the ones which are relevant to what are the needs to those various different groups, which Lindsay mentioned. And a suggestion that I've got is for the September meeting is that we use it as an evidence gathering exercise, purely to address the needs of those who live or travel in vans for one reason or another, and get that information into the committee. And then we have a second session to gather the impact from the residents and councillors side, rather than trying to do both at once. I feel like it'll be a better use of our time to make it one smaller item, focusing on one area, gather that evidence, and then have a second session. And then, should we choose to start working on something further or taking forward a piece of work, we can use those 2 sessions to guide how we want to do that. So that would be my suggestion from this seat, but I'm obviously very open to what all of you think as well. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I was just, the way that it was worded about Gypsy, Romany or van life, as they're either 2 completely separate things or they're the same thing. That either van lifers go and live or stay in prescribed sites that are for Gypsy, Romany travellers, and they're together, or they're something completely different. And if there's something completely different and they're parking in a car park, then Mrs. Miggins from Surbiton, who's on a holiday in a very expensive camper van, can go and park next to them and get treated exactly the same. It shouldn't be, it should either be exactly the same and they stay on prescribed sites that we don't actually have enough of, or they're totally different and they get a ticket, or they get whatever they get. I cannot see how they could be either the same or different, but treated the same for being different. But if you see what I mean.
I see exactly what you mean. So the reason that I've separated them out in this is GRT, Gypsy Romany traveller communities have protected characteristics, and people who choose to live in vans do not have protected characteristics currently. So we'd have to treat them separately. And now the piece of work which we're doing is to be able to discuss that. It's not for us to decide now before gathering the information what should be where and how this should work. It's to further our own education so we can give guidance to council.
But it's about definitions. How are you going to define them? How are you, if you're saying that the Gypsy Roman travellers have got protected status, there's a definition there. Van life, who is going to have to be some sort of definition of who they are, what they do to make themselves protected. I can't see what the definition would be.
So we wouldn't be discussing whether they're protected or not. They are not do not have protected characteristics. They're just people who choose to live in vans, who are not from the cultural and racial backgrounds that are Gypsy, Romanian travellers who do have that protect. So I suppose the easiest way to say it is if I decided to move out of my home and live in my van full time, that I would not have any protected characteristics to do so, but I would still have needs which would need to be met. Or do not. That's for an evidence gathering exercise, which is what we want to do this piece of work on, if I can kind of put it that way. Any more questions, Councillor Martin?
Yeah, can I just ask, in terms of time frame, so this first, I mean, I think it's a good idea to split it up like this. But so that's September, then November for the second part. Is that what we're saying? I'm just wondering where this starts, when, once we've got those outcomes that we want and we start moving forward with this, if that's what we want to do. It's like, over what kind of time frame are we talking about?
That is for us as a committee to decide when we want to do it. So currently in our work plan, we have got in the November meeting waste strategy and the local transport plan, and we have a space reserved for proactive scrutiny matters. So if we wanted to put the second part in November, we could do. If we wanted to wait and put it into the meeting following that, we could do. It's up to us as a committee where we choose to take the second part.
Yeah, I just feel like if we make a start on it, we might as well crack on and sort of get to some outcomes on it within a good time frame. So I'd be quite happy to see that the following meeting, so that it kind of flows and it's cohesive, hopefully, if that can be done.
Yeah, we can see that. Any more questions or debate on this, or any other idea where you want to run with the key lines of inquiry, if you think it's the right way to do things, Councillor Goodall?
Sorry, at the risk of being accused of being an awful pedant, I think you mean EG, not IE. EG's for example, IE that is. So if you're talking about GRT communities in travel in vans, for example, which is EG, GRT communities, what you've got at the moment says that is, i.e., that is the only community you're talking about.
Understood. That's my English knowledge. That so I'll take that one. Yeah, we can change that. I feel like I've been sent to the headmaster's office. Again, yeah. Any more debate on that? Are we okay? So can I put forward then and look for a second that we work to those key lines of inquiry for the first session, and look for someone to second that. Councillor Martin, and then any dissent from putting that on as the key lines of inquiry? No, that's unanimous. And then Councillor Martin, do you want to raise that we add our work plan the second session in November?
Yeah, I'm happy to propose that.
Okay, in that case, I'll be happy to second that. Any dissent? No, great. That being the case, do we want to come back to the second two key lines of inquiry, which I put, which is what are the impacts of residents in particularly densely populated parking spots, and how can BCP Council provide for all of the above? Or do we want to take a bit of time, come back to me again, and we'll flesh out that a little bit more to open up that scope a little bit for the resident side of things? Yeah, so we'll come back to that. If I'll send out an email again looking for input for those key lines of inquiry, if that sounds good to everyone. Yep, great. Okay. So Lindsay, does that seem like we're okay to get that onto the work plan for September and November?
Yeah, Chair, I think for the September session, if I could just confirm, then the suggestion is to invite representatives of Cushty-Bok, and yourself and Councillor Cooper have said that they have representatives of the van living community that they could approach to come and speak to you. So if the committee is happy to reach out in that respect, we will use those key lines of inquiry as a basis, but we should also give them clear questions up front of what you want to ask them. So we will probably work with committee outside of the meeting to gather input on that, if that's okay. November, we may just need to consider the timing around the other reports that you have in there and aim for November, but perhaps reflect on the amount of time it takes for the September session and whether November does provide enough room on your agenda. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is that those two suggested sessions are very much the evidence gathering sessions. If you were to do further work on this in terms of actually sort of setting out the details of a community pact, that would obviously take further scrutiny resource, which you certainly could agree to do. But you have a lot of other suggestions on your work plan, as you know, that have come through to you. So it may be just worth reflecting after those two sessions to see how much more detail you want to go into, or whether you want to pass this over to decision makers as a sort of package of evidence that you've gathered for them to work on further.
Okay, yeah, that sounds fair. I think if we keep November penciled in, and then unless something incredibly urgent presents itself, which we need to do, does that sound fair? Councillor Martin?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn by already putting sort of a time, but it feels like that second bit isn't, it doesn't feel as in-depth as the first bit needs to be, because the second bit, we do sort of have a lot of experience ourselves maybe of where we helped out resident, or, you know, taken inquiries from residents. And I think before, when this came up at the previous meeting, I think we all sort of spoke about an understanding of that. So I think that, like I say, I might be getting it all wrong, because it's usually those ones you think are going to be quite straightforward that turn into the most complex ones. But it feels to me that that's the easier part of this work that's you've just sent out.
I'd hate to say anything's the easier part of the work that we do. I hear what you say, is that we have all had experience of this and helped out residents, but I think I think it'll be really good to try and flesh out exactly what we want to get from that, and also I think perhaps the questions which we want to ask may well be influenced from that first session as well, about the needs of people, and we may see that actually the requirements might turn into, would this be something you would accept? You know, would this be, and we can get those inquiries a little bit more detailed rather than it just being, I have this problem, it's this problem. We can say, well, how do you feel about this, that, and the other? And I think one influences the other and backwards and forwards. So it might seem a little bit more straightforward now, but it might end up being a little bit more difficult afterwards. But we'll see. And I think the time between September and November, hopefully, we can definitely pull it together and get it in there. But is everyone okay with that as agreed for the time being? First session, second session penciled in, to be fleshed out with the key lines of inquiry as we progress with it. And then the third part being decided on after we've done the evidence gathering and perhaps in the work planning section of the February meeting, perhaps. Okay, Lindsay, is that all okay and noted?
That's really helpful for the van life element. Thank you. Would you like me to carry on with some other bits on your work plan, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll try and be as quick as I can. So just firstly, just to correct a reference in case anyone eagle-eyed had spotted, there's a reference to additional scrutiny requests on the cover report. There aren't any. That's a legacy item from a previous meeting, so no scrutiny requests for this meeting. There's a paragraph in your cover report for the work plan that highlights that the local plan development and scrutiny of that is to move to the ONS board remit. That moved over to your committee about a year or so ago because it all sits under the leaders portfolio. However, given that the development of the local plan is coming back on stream and purely because the board has the ability to engage in scrutiny on a more regular basis and that piece of work doesn't have time to be held up, there's been an agreement with the chairs and with the monitoring officer that will move back over to the remit of the overview and scrutiny board. So I just wanted to highlight that. In terms of the rest of your work plan, in September you do have a plant-based food item listed. I just wanted to confirm whether you do want to proceed with that within that meeting or whether you had wanted to dedicate the whole meeting to the van life inquiry. And the other thing I want to raise, and then I'll pause for any views on all of this, is just to highlight that we are aware that Councillor Rice and Councillor Chapman-Law are designated rapporteurs for the piece of work on looking at crossing times that you agreed last meeting, and that will be added to your work plan so they can give regular updates.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, just to be clear to the committee, when we met, as you know, we meet as chairs of all the, and vice chairs as well, actually, of all the different overview and scrutiny committees and boards. And we had a discussion about where the local plan should sit, and we thought under development, whilst the board tracks cabinet, it's the best place for it. We've got a packed agenda here, and we'd have either had to have extra meetings, move things around, pinch some of the board's meetings and use the resource. So we thought it was better to go there, and then any specific bits which overlap into what the rest of our work for the various elements, whether it's here or health or children's, can be siloed off to the relevant committees as and when is needed. So it was done on the basis that it's really important and we need to have as many meetings as possible of the local plan. The other bit, the plant-based item, which is on our agenda for September, I would be inclined to keep that on. I don't think just having a single item agenda is going to be very helpful or a good use of our time to get through our work plan. I know this report is in progress, especially particularly with the monitoring of the changes to the options in the kiosks and outlets over summer as well. I think it's probably a good time to look at it, and it'll just continue getting pushed back if not. So if no one dissents from that, I'd like to keep it on. Okay, and we also have one space on that agenda as well reserved for pre-decision or reactive scrutiny. So that's anything which comes up on the Cabinet Forward Plan, which might be going to them, which we want to bring on at this point. There's nothing being drawn to my attention, but that doesn't mean that something won't be. And if you're just happy to delegate to myself and the Vice Chair, should something come up, to add that onto the agenda if we need to. No dissension? Great. Yeah, and Felicity, we're looking forward to getting your reports on the crossing timer. I think the one I mentioned last time actually seems to have improved somehow. I don't know whether it was just talking about it. And the only other thing which I want to raise is we've had requests, and it's been brought up before, about the chemicals used in weed spraying to come to this committee several times. And there's one particular resident who is very, very good at bringing this to my attention and the committee's attention again. And I think that a briefing for us in winter after this season to see what the impact is of the chemicals this year, the usage compared to last year's, would be a good time to do that if everyone is in agreement. And that doesn't have to be a formal meeting for that briefing. It can be one of the ones that which we have outside of the meeting times, and then we can decide whether or not to bring it to a public meeting. Okay, Lindsay, anything more you would like to add on this item?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. The only other question on it then is if anyone from the list of, quite substantial list actually, of requests which we've had and items which have got dates to be allocated, if you've got any particular priorities which you want to see coming up into the meetings next year, then let us know and we'll do our best to get those scheduled in as quick as possible. Because I always think it's the best way to tackle these is where there's a real energy from people to get involved and do it. And that brings us to the end of that item. The only thing left for me to say is the date of the next meeting, which is 6 p.m. on Wednesday, the 10th of September. And to thank everyone who's come and presented to us tonight, everyone who's taken part in the meeting, all new members, everyone who has tried to watch at home, despite the sound, and hopefully that video will be uploaded with sound soon, so everyone will be able to catch up on it. But for tonight, I'll just say good night and thank you very much.